I'm Nick Westergaard, and this is On Brand, helping you tell your story. My guest this week is Rob Meyerson.
Despite the title, Desinging Brand Identity, this is not just a design book in the sense of graphic design. It really takes all those words sort of in their biggest sense. So brand identity for us is not just a logo, and it's not just the visual aspects of the brand. It includes every sort of sensory experience and interaction you have with the brand. It includes all of the strategy that goes into building that identity. It includes all of the implementation. So it really is sort of an A to Z branding encyclopedia.
Rob Meyerson is a brand consultant and professional namer who runs Heirloom, an independent brand strategy and identity consultancy. With Alina Wheeler, he co-authored the 6th edition of the best-selling Desinging Brand Identity, a comprehensive guide to the world of brands and branding. Rob is also the author of the book Brand Naming, creator and host of the podcast How Brands Are Built, and a contributor to leading publications such as Harvard Business Review, Entrepreneur, and Business Insider. My interview with Rob Meyerson is coming right up. But first,
my dad works in B2B marketing, but I never really knew what that meant. Then one day my dad came by my school for career day and told everyone in my class he was a big ROAS man. Then he just kept saying things like, the bigger the ROAS, the better, over and over. My friends still laugh at me to this day. I think it means calculating a return on ad spend. One thing's for sure, I'll be known as the ROAS man's kid for the rest of my days. Why couldn't you just be a fireman or a lawyer? Why? You ruined my life, Dad.
Not everyone gets B2B, but LinkedIn has the people who do. And with ads on LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people based on job title, industry, likelihood to buy, and more. Start converting your B2B audience into high-quality leads today. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/MPN to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/MPN. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Steve Turney hosts a great podcast geared toward mental health marketers called The Boost. Steve, tell listeners what you cover on the show.
The Boost is our podcast, and the tagline is conversations with people promoting mental health. And that's what it is. So it's marketers, company executives, therapists, and mental health advocates talking about what they're doing to move this industry and this important thing called mental health forward.
Amazing. And where can people subscribe?
I'm big on LinkedIn, so you can find us there, just /Steve Turney, or you can find the show at marketingpodcasts.net, or search for The Boost wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard him. Go subscribe.
Rob Meyerson, welcome to On Brand.
Thanks so much, Nick. It's good to be back.
I am excited to have you back. You know, we get lucky enough here along the way to talk to smart people and then to have them come up again, either doing something interesting or working on a new project for a new company with a new brand. And I'm excited because you are have done just that by being the co-author of the 6th edition of a fascinating and really kind of a standout book, standout brand, to be meta in my own bookie sense, on the topic of designing brand identity. So talk about this new undertaking and what it means.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head calling this book a brand. It's a book about branding, and it is a brand unto itself. And all of the credit for that goes to my co-author, Alina Wheeler, who first wrote Desinging Brand Identity 20 years ago. In about 2003, it came out, built the reputation for this book through her own hard work, created another 4 editions up to the 5th edition over the following 20 years, and making it bigger and better each time, and just building a brand as you do. Although it's sort of a strange category, I guess, to think of a book as a brand. But she did exactly that. She built a community and a following around it. And then she came to me and asked if I was interested in co-authoring the 6th edition with her, which of course is a huge honor. She was looking to step away and retire. And so she wanted to make sure that the book that she had created had a future. And so co-authoring this one with her was sort of a handing over of the reins for designing brand identity. And it was an incredible experience. We spent over 2 years working really hard on this book together. Unfortunately, just in December, so just a few months before the book was published, Alina passed away. And so that was heartbreaking. But if there is a silver lining, it's that she was able to see this book through. She was able to see the final version of it in a digital form. She loved what we had created together. And so now I'm here to talk about it, sadly, without her. She speaks about it much more eloquently than I do, and she has much more of a claim to, be able to talk about it since it is her creation. But I'm happy to be here and share what I can with you about this great book.
I love that, and it is such a neat story in its own way. And I want to rewind for just a second and note that I'm so glad that you understood what I said of a standout book and a standout brand, because I do think of certainly a book like this that is so well known and looked to, and in its sixth edition now. But I love kind of the focus of this. And I loved our last conversation where we talked about really brand naming your bailiwick. But as you took on this project and, went from naming and a book that kind of zooms out to brand identity, talk about that hierarchical relationship.
Sure. One thing to say, and Alina would have said this too, despite the title, Designing Brand Identity, this is not just a design book in the sense of graphic design. It really takes all those words sort of in their biggest sense. So brand identity for us is not just a logo, and it's not just the visual aspects of the brand. It includes every sort of sensory experience and interaction you have with a brand. It includes all of the strategy that goes into building that identity. It includes all of the implementation. So it really is sort of an A to Z. I almost think of it as a branding encyclopedia with sections on almost every topic. Well, every topic we could think of that we thought was relevant, and even some that are sort of tangentially related to branding, just to really help people understand the full range, sort of the breadth of what branding is today. And then designing, of course, yes, graphic design, but also shaping that identity, which again starts with research. It goes through strategy. So naming is what I wrote my first book about, and we talked about 2 years ago on this podcast. And it certainly is an area of expertise for me. There are sections in this book about naming that I, of course, was eager to take a red pen to and make some changes and updates and get great new examples in there. That was kind of the low-hanging fruit for me when I started this daunting task of updating an over 300-page book. But I also am a strategist. I've been working in brand consulting for about 20 years, have seen and experienced pretty much every aspect of it. And so I was able to bring that breadth of experience to this. And where I don't have the expertise, and this is exactly what Alina did, us together would reach out to other experts. And so one thing that's so interesting about this book compared to my first book, rather than being sort of a brain dump of here's all the stuff I know about naming, this is much more of a collaborative exercise in finding experts, interviewing them, asking them to look at pages in the book and asking them how they would update them, asking them for content we can use, getting their permission to use it. Not only written stuff, but a lot of images. This book has over 800 images, logos, diagrams in it. And for most of those, we needed permission, not to mention high resolution files that we could use to print. And so this book is a project much more, every book, anyone who's ever written a book, as you know, Nick, it is a project to say the least. But this book was the kind of project where you need a team and you need some kind of software or something to even just track the progress that you're making as you move through the process of updating it.
I love how you framed that so much so I wrote it down of that it takes all of those words in their biggest sense, because I sometimes feel like I go down this rabbit hole almost every other week on the show. But branding itself is so misunderstood of what this is, and especially when you're coming at it from the sense of identity, because there is, your background in naming, in the words around our brand, even beyond the name itself. And then you look at the design aspect, the visual aspect, both of a brand logo, but also the visual brand identity. It really is what you said of all of those words and in their biggest sense. And when it comes to the book aspect of it, it feels like it could get really encyclopedic real fast. So how did the two of you kind of look at this and say, okay, what's on topic, what's not, what's our charter here?
Sure. Well, this is one place where it is easier to update a book than create it from scratch. And so, I was able to lean so heavily on all of the work that Alina has already done here. And it becomes a question of not so much just what do we include in the grandest sense, but looking at the 5th edition, what do we think still is relevant? What's missing that needs to be in there? It's a little bit of an easier starting place, or I should say it's a much easier starting place. But the structure of the book has stayed the same since the 1st edition. And this is part of the genius of Alina Wheeler. It's a 3-section book. The first part is concepts around branding, basics, fundamentals, definitions. What is a brand? What is brand identity? What is brand strategy? The second section is all about process. So from start to finish, to the degree that you can create a universal process for branding, what would that look like? And so what are all the little steps in there? And then the third section is all case studies, what we call best practices. So that gives you a good kind of roadmap. And then within each of those 3 sections, every discrete topic is a 2-page spread. So you use the word encyclopedic. It really is like an encyclopedia in that you can be interested in the topic. You can look it up in the table of contents or in the index. You can find 2 pages about that topic. It goes sort of as deep as it can in those 2 pages, gives lots of examples, quotes, images, so that you have a sense of, if you needed to know more, where might you go to find that out? And so what Alina and I did is, again, just look at the full book, the 5th edition, and decide what needed to change. And that's a conversation we had. That's a conversation we brought in other experts to ask them about. And we added things like that we felt were big new trends or important things that were missing. We added AI as a trend, even though that's not a branding topic exactly. It's certainly something that is becoming increasingly relevant in the world of branding. And so we felt we needed to address it. Other things like evidence-based marketing has become quite big since the publication of How Brands Grow, and that was never in the book. And then some things that are not new, but just felt like they should or could be included now. So we have a whole spread on iconography. We have a spread on other senses outside of visual and sonic, which has been in the book for a long time. We added one on taste and smell and touch. And so it's kind of filling the gaps, looking at things that feel outdated. Like there was a spread on smartphones, which is, it's sort of not a term we use anymore because every phone almost is smart. Right. And so that changed to something more about digital interfaces, which includes AR and VR. And so, that's kind of how we went through it. And we, again, relied on our own expertise as well as that of others.
On Brand, we'll be right back after this.
My dad works in B2B marketing, but I never really knew what that meant. Then one day my dad came by my school for career day and told everyone in my class he was a big ROAS man. Then he just kept saying things like, the bigger the ROAS, the better, over and over. My friends still laugh at me to this day. I think it means calculating a return on ad spend. One thing's for sure. I'll be known as the ROAS man's kid for the rest of my days. Why couldn't you just be a fireman or a lawyer? Why? You ruined my life, Dad.
Not everyone gets B2B, but LinkedIn has the people who do. And with ads on LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people based on job title, industry, likelihood to buy, and more. Start converting your B2B audience into high-quality leads today. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/MPN to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/MPN. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Steve Turney hosts a great podcast geared toward mental health marketers called The Boost. Steve, tell listeners what you cover on the show.
The Boost is our podcast, and the tagline is conversations with people promoting mental health. And that's what it is. So it's marketers, company executives, therapists, and mental health advocates talking about what they're doing to move this industry and this important thing called mental health forward.
Amazing. And where can people subscribe?
I'm big on LinkedIn, so you can find us there, just /Steve Turney, or you can find the show at marketingpodcasts.net, or search for The Boost wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard him. Go subscribe.
Now, back to the show. So you've got me intrigued in talking about the AI aspect of things, and because I feel like that is such a, as you look at updating anything, I mean, I think about books. I think about how we talk about brands. It's like AI's almost become a big category anywhere in business. AI in HR, AI, all sorts of different applications. So when it comes to brands, as you talk about that focus, that charter of designing brand identity, how do you decide, okay, this is the angle of addressing AI that needs to go into this book?
Sure, it's a great question. When you think about it, addressing AI in a book that's going to be on the shelves, the digital shelves here for 3 to 5 years, probably before another edition comes out, it almost feels silly because AI is different now than it was a month ago. I mean, I've been watching these videos coming out every day of what AI is doing with video now, and that probably wasn't something that was on my radar to the degree that it is now, at least when I was writing this section. So it's very hard to figure out what to put in here. One of the things that we did is we figured we can show a snapshot in time. And so we went to the agency and Walsh in New York, and they did one of the first branding projects that I'm aware of, at least, that used AI generated art in the brand's visual identity system. And that felt to me like something that no matter where AI goes, this is a really interesting case study for how it was used early on. And so that takes up a fair bit of the section, is just let's explore that and get some quotes from Jessica Walsh about the project and her creative director about where they think AI is headed. And then you just do your best to kind of explain why it's relevant to brand. This book it has a lot of different audiences, but one of the main audiences for it is students. And so a lot of what we're doing in the book is educating. And so we want to make it clear why we've included AI, where we think it's headed to a degree, although we're not, technologists and we're not necessarily making big predictions, but just the fact that AI is increasingly influencing the way the work is done, the possibilities around not only visuals, but other aspects of brand work. And just getting it in there is something that we think students, all students of brand, whether you're, in the middle of your career or just starting out, need to be aware of.
That's such a great way to kind of unpack what's ultimately a big daunting issue. And I think that's, something that we desperately need today, but also something that I feel like people would turn to not only, I mean, that's why a book like this is a brand in and of itself and is a staple in the world of brand building. You mentioned earlier talking about the case studies that the book takes a deep dive on. Is there one that are there any brands that really that show up more than once in the book that are really powerful examples and resonate a lot of different ways?
There are. So one of the things that we wanted to do with the case studies this time around is give a full refresh on the 50 plus case studies that are in the book. Previous editions have had lots of new case studies, but I don't believe there's ever been a full refresh since the first edition. And my feeling especially was that if we're asking you to buy a new edition of this book, and so many people in the branding community own the fifth or fourth or third edition, then at the very least, we can ensure you're getting all new case studies because, of course, some topics don't change as much, and there's not going to be a huge update on some of those sections. And so, yes, we had 50 great case studies with incredible, beautiful imagery to choose from when we wanted to give examples of things on other spreads earlier in the book. And we try to mix it up a lot. It's not like you're seeing the same 50 things over and over again, but in some cases, I'd say in rare cases, there was work that was such a perfect example of something that we felt let's use it again, a different image, but of the same project. So there's some work for AC Milan, the football club, in here that I love because it's one of these projects where it was a visual identity refresh, but they didn't change the logo. And we have, a lot of variety in the case studies in a lot of different ways. But one thing I wanted to get in here was not every rebrand is just sort of a logo project. And this one is so great because they built an entirely new system around this logo that they felt was too precious, that had too much of a legacy to change, which I think a lot of brand consultants could learn from, that not everything always needs to change. And so when we were looking for a page about sort of extended visual identity systems beyond the logo, we were able to use some additional examples. And there are other cases like that in the book.
That is such a great example. And I love the idea of, because when we look at refreshed books, we always tell people that, the best advice is to look to your audience, look to your consumers. And we don't always follow that advice as well as we give it as practitioners. And I love that at the very least, you should be hearing about different brands, because I think we can all cite examples of, okay, I know everybody's talking about this or that. So I think that viewing that as really kind of table stakes in this is an important way to put that consumer, that brand builder picking up this book, whether it's for the first time or, like you said, if it's someone that loves this book and is excited to dig into the new edition. I think that that's incredibly important as well. So in talking about having that you mentioned that, in keeping it from being encyclopedic, that's where, updating an existing work is handy. As you looked at this and thought, okay, if I'm going to bring the Rob Meyerson brand of, branding to this, where do you see that you've been able to do that?
Sure. It's funny you ask that. One of the first things that Alina and I did is I am the proud owner of a 5th edition Designing Brand Identity with Alina Wheeler's handwritten notes with a Sharpie on every single page. She went through and she X'd things out and said, let's find a better example here. And on the pages about naming, which we talked about, and the pages about brand strategy, she basically just wrote Rob. Like Rob to update. She knew that these were my sort of areas of focus. Brand architecture was another one. And she just said, you go for it, whatever you think needs to go on here. And on the pages about naming and brand strategy and brand architecture, Alina basically just wrote, Rob, you find something new to put in here, or you update this as you think is fit. And so to answer your question, the flavor that I bring to it, part of it is that specific expertise. I think another thing that maybe I brought to this edition is I mentioned evidence-based marketing, which has become this big trend. I'm not a zealot about Byron Sharp and Jenny Romaniak's work out of Ehrenberg Bass Institute in Australia, but I do think they have made a massive impact on the industry. It's a little bit less so in the US than in Europe, but I wanted to make sure that that was in here. And outside of that, I think there were some things in the 5th edition that struck me as almost sort of the opposite of evidence-based, things that were more sort of expressions that people say about branding, or without necessarily really thinking them through, things that aren't quite as rational. And trust me, I believe as much as anybody else that branding is not 100% rational. It's art and science. But there were some things in here where I tried to steer the book a little bit more in is there sort of a technically correct or an evidence-based answer to this question? And can we get that in there? So on the strategy page, I wanted to get, work in there from quotes from Mark Ritson, a marketing professor. I wanted to get, a little more Byron Sharp in here, the author of How Brands Grow, getting David Ocker's work, even showing Ocker's model. Most people call it the Ocker model. He calls it the brand vision framework. That was not in here. And that's a pretty tried and true method of articulating a brand strategy. And so there are things in here, we try to get a real variety in here. And there are things in here that I don't necessarily use in my own consulting career, but that, again, if you're a student of branding, I think you need to know about. It's this foundational expertise. So it's a mix of things that have been in the industry for a long time. And I just think you got to know about this if you're going to call yourself a branding professional. And then some much more sort of new leading edge things. This is the new way of thinking about this that I wanted to make sure were in here as well. And so getting that mix in here, I think is a little bit of the flavor that you'll get in the 6th edition, maybe a little bit more than previous editions.
I love that, and I love hearing David Ocker brought up. I makes me feel like a big-time podcaster when I can say that I count someone like him as a friend of the show, and he may even be like a 3-time guest.
Wow.
But that speaks to, like I said at the top of our conversation, whenever someone's doing anything new and interesting, and David is very good at doing things in our space that are new and interesting.
He is prolific.
He is at that. Well, I've smiled many times during all of our conversations, but especially here during this past half hour. Rob, what is a brand that has made you smile recently?
So I'll give you one that I use on an almost daily basis, and I think this one is polarizing. A friend of mine posted on LinkedIn. He's an Italian American, and he posted something on LinkedIn about coffee. And he said he described his perfect cup of coffee, and then asked what everybody else's was. And so comments were ranging from, I get a French press every morning to I just go to Starbucks. But in the post, he sort of derided the Keurig method of making coffee. He said, God forbid it's the Keurig. I don't have one of those. I have a Nespresso, which is obviously a competitor. And I know it's a little controversial whether that's good coffee or not, or whether it's sort of the right way to make coffee. But I got to tell you, I have a daily Americano every morning with this Nespresso machine, and it makes me smile. I would say it sort of keeps me alive having this cup of coffee every day. So, if it wasn't Nespresso, I might be able to replace it with another brand, I suppose. But right now, that's the brand of choice. It has been for about a decade. And I love it.
Well, that is not only a great smile, but it is a great story about that smile as well. Rob, where can folks go to learn more about who you are and what you do?
The easiest place to go, Nick, is just robmeyerson.com. That's Meyerson, Meyerson. You can find links to Designing Brand Identity, to brand naming, my first book, to my agency Heirloom, to my own podcast and blog. So pretty much everything is consolidated there. If you really just want to get to the book that we've been talking about, it's available on Amazon now, at least in North America. It should be coming to other parts of the world very soon. And you can also go to dbibook.com to learn more about it, or follow me on Instagram, where I post about it pretty frequently.
Awesome. Well, we will link up to all of that in the show notes, which folks can always find at onbrandpodcast.com. Rob Meyerson, thanks for joining us on Brand.
Thank you, Nick. It was great to talk to you again.
On Brand is part of the Marketing Podcast Network. If you like what you're hearing, if we've made you smile, you can always listen free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever your favorite platform may be. And please take a moment and rate and review the podcast to help others find the show. Until next week, I'm Nick Westergaard, and I'll see you on the internet.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Steve Turney hosts a great podcast geared toward mental health marketers called The Boost. Steve, tell listeners what you cover on the show.
The Boost is our podcast, and the tagline is conversations with people promoting mental health. And that's what it is. So it's marketers, company executives, therapists, and mental health advocates talking about what they're doing to move this industry and this important thing called mental health forward.
Amazing. And where can people subscribe?
I'm big on LinkedIn, so you can find us there, just /Steve Turney, or you can find the show at marketingpodcasts.net, or search for The Boost wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard him. Go subscribe.
This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.